So friends, after 2 years of pandemic living, after 2 years of daily doom scrolling to check out the latest infection numbers, the latest death tallies, the latest and most up-to-date guidance about how to stay alive. After 2 years of constantly adjusting and then readjusting and then readjusting our daily routines. After 3 years of watching our leaders on all levels of government struggle to deal with this disaster even somewhat competently. After these 2 going on 3 years of pandemic living, I think it's safe to say that a lot of us are feeling pretty burned out. And if you think that you are among those numbers, you need to know that there is an actual technical definition for burnout that I want to share with you and that we'll be using throughout this 4-week series that we are doing on beating burnout. Here it is. Burnout is physical, emotional, or mental exhaustion accompanied by decreased motivation, lowered performance, and negative attitudes towards oneself and others that is the result of ongoing long-term stress. That's a lot of words. Let me say it again. Burnout is physical, emotional, or mental exhaustion accompanied by decreased motivation, lowered performance, and negative attitudes towards oneself and others that is the result of ongoing long-term stress. Now, with that definition thoroughly ensconced in our minds, I now offer you this 7-question quiz to assess whether or not you may or may not be experiencing burnout. So you don't have to raise your hand and out yourself or anything. This is just for your own personal benefit. Question number 1. Do you find yourself isolating from others and withdrawing from social interactions? Number 2. Do you find yourself procrastinating a lot, or at least more than usual? Number 3, do you find yourself becoming impatient or irritable in everyday interactions? Number 4, do you find yourself having trouble sleeping no matter how tired you feel? Number 5, do you find yourself no longer interested in your once beloved hobbies? Number 6, do you find yourself turning to addictive habits for comfort, things like smoking, drugs, alcohol? And number 7, do you find that your performance at work or at school is deteriorating? You are late more, absent more, missing more deadlines. If you answered yes to one or more of those questions, it is very likely that you are suffering from burnout. And who can possibly blame you for that? However, what we see in this morning's Bible reading from 1 Kings chapter 19 is both that burnout is nothing new. It has been afflicting the people of God from time immemorial. And also we see that burnout is not something that we have to just live with. It's actually something we can do something about. We can take active steps to get out of it. So I just want to take a couple minutes to talk about the prophet Elijah who just appeared in this story that Stephanie did such a wonderful job reading for us this morning. So what we need to know about Elijah is that the times that he grew up in were turbulent ones in Israel. Israel's throne kept on being passed from one evil, idolatrous king to the next, usually after a bloody coup or some sort of military uprising. So it was an extremely politically unstable kind of time. And what's more, for the 3 years directly preceding this morning's story, a drought had overtaken the land of Israel. And for 3 full years, Israel did not see any rain. It didn't even see any dew, the Bible tells us. And the prophet Elijah survived only by direct divine intervention. The story goes that Elijah was supplied with all the water and all the food that he needed to survive. And then, at long last, God spoke to the prophet Elijah and told him to go to Israel's current king, a guy by the name of Ahab. God told Elijah to go to King Ahab and tell him that finally, at long last, rain was going to return to the land of Israel. But when Elijah shows up to tell Ahab this good news, Ahab is far from excited. Rather, he accuses Elijah of trying to stir up trouble in the land of Israel. Elijah himself, not one to mince words, he assured the king that all of Israel's troubles were due to his own, that is, the king's own poor leadership. Chew on that, Ahab, he said. Careful. And then, in a show of force, to show that he was really truly a servant of the one true God and not just a troublemaker in the land of Israel, Elijah decided to put on a bit of a show. And here's what he did. He got a bunch of stones together and he made an altar. And then he got some sacrificial meat, some filet mignon, a little pot roast, put it on, said altar. He then doused it with gallon after gallon of water to make sure it's all good and wet. Elijah then said a little prayer. And upon saying that prayer, fire descended from the heavens and it consumed everything. It consumed the altar, it consumed the meat, it consumed all the water that was wetting it down. Now, after seeing all of this, the people of Israel were thoroughly convinced that Elijah really was a prophet of the one true God. And so Elijah seized this moment to command the people. He told them to round up all of the false prophets that King Ahab had been listening to, and he ordered that they be executed. Now, if the story is to be trusted, that is actually around 1,000 people that Elijah ordered to be killed. So I want to be clear, I'm not condoning his actions, I'm not celebrating his actions, I'm just reporting the story as it's told in Scripture. So that actually brings us to the beginning of today's story. So after having this interaction with Elijah, and after Elijah kills all these prophets, King Ahab returns home to his wife, who is Queen Jezebel. Ahab, of course, tells him how his day went, how he had this interaction with Elijah, how Elijah rounded up all these prophets and had them killed. Queen Jezebel immediately, she becomes enraged because it turns out that these prophets that Elijah had killed were prophets of the religion that Jezebel herself practiced. Because if you remember back to last summer in our Bad Girls of the Bible sermon series, Jezebel was a foreigner, and she worshipped a foreign god, a god other than the God of Israel. So these were all prophets of her religion that Elijah had killed. She was angry, and she immediately sent a message to Elijah that he better watch out because she was now gunning for him. Or perhaps more accurately, she was now spearing for him. She wanted him dead. So just to summarize all that has been happening heretofore in Elijah's life. First off, we have this unstable political climate with power changing hand from evil king to evil king after a bloody coup, after another bloody coup, and another bloody coup. We have a 3-year drought. And although Elijah was lucky and survived, a lot of the people that he knew and loved did not. We have this intense conflict now between Elijah and the king. We have this massively violent encounter with those prophets of the god Baal. And although Elijah was the one to instigate it, surely that had to be a traumatizing experience. And now we have the bloodthirsty Queen Jezebel with her sights set on Elijah. Now, I don't care who you are. I don't care how tough you think you are. That is a lot of ongoing stress for anyone to deal with. And how does our boy Elijah respond to it? Well, the story tells us he withdraws from the world, doesn't he? He leaves a servant behind in a town called Beersheba, and he goes off into the wilderness where he sits under a broom tree. And if you want to imagine what a broom tree looks like, it looks like a tree you would find in the African savannah. If you've ever seen The Lion King, it's one of those trees with a really wide canopy, but they're kind of short. So he's sitting under this broom tree, shirking all of his prophetic responsibilities. And as he's praying, he starts to get irritable, doesn't he? He starts to get angry. He shouts up to the heavens and says, God, just take me now. Just end it. This is all too much. Just let me die, God. Just let me die. Now, if at this moment in time, I were to give Elijah that same 7-question quiz that you yourself just took, you better believe he'd be checking off a box or 6. Is Elijah socially isolating himself from the world? Yes, he is. He's sitting by himself in the wilderness. Is he getting irritable and impatient in everyday interactions? Well, I mean, he's shouting up at God while he's in the midst of a prayer that seems pretty irritable to me. Is he procrastinating, and is his job performance suffering? Unless he's prophesying to that broom tree, I should certainly say it is. So in other words, the prophet Elijah is burned out as burned out can be. And who can possibly blame him after everything he's been through? But our story doesn't end there, does it? It keeps on going. We're told that after this fit of rage in which he's yelling at God, the prophet Elijah falls asleep. And as he's sleeping, an angel of the Lord appears, and this is kind of hilarious. He pokes him awake, pokes and prods him until he wakes up again, and says, Elijah, get up and eat and drink. So Elijah is roused from his sleep, and he looks, and some bread and a jar of water has magically appeared around him. So he eats some, he drinks some, and then he falls back asleep. Again, the angel of the Lord appears and pokes at him and prods him until he wakes up again. And the angel says to him, Elijah, eat and drink, or else you won't have enough strength for the journey ahead. So once again, Elijah eats and he drinks. And thus we are told he had enough strength for a 40-day, 40-night journey to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. Now, I know what you're thinking. I know what's going on in your head at this very moment. You are thinking to yourself, could it possibly be the point of this Bible story? Could it possibly be the point of this sermon that we should nap more and eat better? Could that possibly be the point of this Bible story? If so, could we read more stories like that? Right? This is advice that we give behind. Not that repentance business. Let's talk about napping more and eating better. Well, the good news for you, friends, is that, yes, that is my point today. We need to nap more and we need to eat better. And here is why. If you go to any therapist, if you go to any doctor to ask them to help you deal with your burnout, they will tell you that a big chunk of what you have to do to dig yourself out of that hole is you need to get the rest you need and the sustenance that your body needs in order to recover, in order to recharge, in order to be able to deal with all the stressors that we experience in the world around us, especially in the midst of a pandemic. And right here today, we have a ton of therapists in the room. We have some medical professionals. Ask them afterwards. I don't think they'll disagree with me. However, the truth is I am neither a doctor nor a therapist. So my job is to tell you that some of the major benefits of taking more naps and eating more snacks is, first off, there are an amazing reminder to us They are an amazing, regular reminder to us that we are not God, that we are not the center of the universe. Because when we lay down on our couch to catch some Z's, and each time we wake up and discover that the world has went on just swimmingly without our participation in it for those 20 minutes, right, we are reminded that we are not the center of the universe. We are reminded that we're not the ones holding this whole thing together. That's not our work. That's God. That's number one. And number two, snacking more and napping more is essentially an act of humility. It's a regular reminder to ourselves that we are limited, finite beings who need rest and who need sustenance and able to be able to continue to labor on in the work that God has given us to do. The work of love, the work of mercy, and the work of justice. We are creatures of the living God, and napping regularly and snacking regularly reminds us that we are not God. We are His beloved creation. And so, friends, it is my prayer today that in the example of the prophet Elijah, and in the name of the risen Christ, that you would nap brazenly, and that you would snack boldly, that you would have the strength that you need to begin your journey out of burnout. Amen.